Spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live." He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid. Have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside, except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, rise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said that she should be given something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So today we hear the ending of the story of David and Absalom. And many people are familiar with certain passages from the life of David about his battle with Goliath and about his sinfulness with Bathsheba. Not as many people are familiar with the story of David and Absalom. It takes up about 4 chapters of 2 Samuel. Basically, Absalom was one of David's sons, and David had many sons, and because he had many concubines. And Absalom was one of the sons in line to the throne. And things started going sour between David and Absalom when Absalom's sister was raped by another one of David's sons, Amnon. And Absalom was angry with David because David did not punish Amnon. What he did was a punishable offense in the law of Moses. And so David had mercy on Amnon, and that began to build the fury within Absalom. And so eventually Absalom basically came up with a scheme, and he started trying to find followers. And he started standing outside of the court and basically whispering in people's ears little critiques about David. People would go into the court perhaps, and their requests were not fulfilled. And Absalom would basically whisper to the people as they were walking out, what happened? "Oh, well, if I was the king, I would have handled that differently." And just kind of slowly sowing disrespect towards his father. Eventually, Absalom arranged a dinner, and he invited Amnon, the man who had raped his sister, and he also invited David with the intention of having both of them put to death secretly at the dinner. Basically like a scene out of The Godfather, like inviting them to this dinner and then murdering them while they were there. So very wicked and corrupt Absalom. And so eventually after he did this dinner, he basically started a rebellion. And he started a civil war within the kingdom of Jerusalem. But the rebellion was not very successful. It was pretty quickly stomped out. Eventually Absalom, After being sent into exile, he desired to return to his father's house. Kind of like the story of the prodigal son. And David, surprisingly enough, welcomed him back into the palace after 2 years. And 2 Samuel says that Absalom came into the court and bowed his head, and David actually kissed him, embracing him back into his household. And unfortunately for David, Absalom decided to rebel again. This time it was much more vicious, and it went on for a longer time. David actually had to flee Jerusalem. And we heard yesterday the story about the man who was throwing stones at David as he was basically having to flee the city. Looked like he may have lost the war and lost the kingship. Absalom eventually was defeated, which is what we read about today. And Absalom had kind of an embarrassing end to his life. He was known for his very long and beautiful hair, according to 2 Samuel. He was a very handsome man. And his hair actually got caught in a tree as he was riding underneath the tree. And so there he was, hanging between heaven and earth. And David's general Joab stabbed him in the heart, pierced his heart 3 times. And that's how Absalom died. Very reminiscent of Jesus, hanging between heaven and earth. And David, when he heard the news about Absalom, this is kind of the climax of the story. The thing that is the most significant is that when David was brought news about Absalom's death, the messenger thought that David was going to rejoice in his victory. But instead, David wept. My son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Heart of a father. And the beautiful thing about the story of Absalom is that it is a prefiguration of what Jesus eventually did for us on the cross. Despite all the times that we rebel against God the Father, what did he do? He doesn't seek vengeance upon us. Instead, he sent his Son to hang between heaven and earth, to be crucified on a tree, to have his heart pierced. God did die instead of us. The one thing that David wished